Oh, okay. We got some.
That sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to take out the LEDs.
No,
No more than usual.
it's only for you. A lot of people wanted that seat.
Still counting how many people we're not finished.
Oh, okay.
I'm up to 86. And you see the intercom on the front of the property.
Richard, say something?
Say something. What would you like me to say? You can't hear me at all? I don't have a very big voice, I know that. I'll try to make it big for you.
Yeah.
What does he mean by that?
I'm surprised about that chip. I didn't know anybody made a chip.
Nothing?
Dave?
Hang on.
How about you listen when I say it's working, so we can start the meeting and go home.
All right, go ahead. Start the meeting. We don't have good sound at all. Something's wrong.
Is it the mic me or what? It's Mr. Mevo? Is it picking up audio at all?
Yes.
All right. All right, we're going to give it a try. Okay. All right, I want to welcome everyone to the July 14th, 2023 meeting of the New Jersey Antique Radio Club here in Bowen Hall, Princeton University. And we're very happy to be here, except that our liaison, Professor Mike Littman, is not here at the moment. He is in Europe cruising on the Danube. Yes, okay. Any new faces in the auditorium? I seem to see a new face. Yes, sir, who are you? Could you stand up, please?
I am David Fiore, Jr. I'm associated with my own company, Animir Electronics.
What is it again?
Animir Electronics. Animir is a contraction of analog miracles.
Oh, it's a miracle that analog still exists in your company, yes.
That's the truth. That's the truth. That's right. So one of my more recent miracles involves AM radio, and suddenly I have an interest in radio. So I've been an electrical engineer since I was in college, so since I graduated from college, and I've been doing things in radio frequencies. A lot of what I've done is in radio frequencies, but I have never had a real interest in radios until now.
Oh, well, it's amazing. We're happy to have you. How did you find out about us?
And I did restore an old radio,
What was that?
an old Admiral that I found at a flea market.
Okay.
Still had the original tubes.
Right.
All the paper capacitors were gone. Thank goodness. So I replaced them, and it worked fine. And actually, Scott helped me align it.
Good, good. Well, we hope you enjoy our evening here, and we hope that you become a member. I gave you a brochure out there, and you'll see what we're all about. All right, thank you. Thank you for coming. And Scott, thank you for bringing it. Here's your $10 for head.
It's supposed to be secret.
Yeah, you're right. Well, it used to be $5, but you know, after the pandemic and everything, everything's so much more expensive. Okay, let's move on to infirmary reports. And fortunately, I don't have anything critical at the moment. One thing I did, I contacted some of our DX members who are in northern, southern New York, but northern New Jersey, if you want to call it that. Radio Willie, he's in Orange County, and also Bill Lears, he's up in Sullivan County. And surprisingly, they didn't suffer any of the storms that anybody in the vicinity of the Hudson Valley did. Actually, it's a swath just carried across Connecticut into Vermont, and what a hell of a mess. And also through Highland Falls, New York, which is about 22 miles north of me. I had rainstorms and all that, many of us did, but it wasn't that bad, all right? But Highland Falls, New York are totally obliterated. And I know it very well there because one of our former members who was a mentor to me, a member club, Art Kingsley, came from there. And he was very important to that little community. And I only hope, well, Art's passed a long time now, and I'm just glad that he didn't have to live through that mess because it's a continuing mess. The whole village has just slid down into the Hudson River. Really a hell of a thing. One person died, too. So anybody else have anything to do with infirmary reports? Anything anybody knows that, I mean, we all have aches and pains. I don't want to hear about that. All right? But just let me know if there's anything else I should know. All right, old business. All right, Saturday, June 10th, the VCF had their Vintage Computer Federation held their electronic flea market, can't read my own writing, at the original Camp Evans parking lot. Now, I do know that some of us were vendors. Bobby Bennett was. Did anybody attend? Did anybody go? Okay. Jim, what is your comment?
It was very well attended, and there were a lot more vendors this time than there had been at previous ones, but there were far fewer radios than we'd ever seen before. There were only a handful of radios and nothing in our usual
Yeah.
category.
Well, actually, for me, that's good to hear, that
Yeah.
people want to come to our Hamfest swap meets instead of that.
Exactly.
Nev?
Oh, well, let's see, it was a kind of a fun event, an oversized tripod, probably mount speaker-like holder-upper thing, probably it's going to become an antenna mount for next field day.
All right. Oh, that's great, that's great. You know, I've attended once or twice, and I actually picked up something radio-related, so that was kind of interesting. But again, it's mostly computer, or electronics, or just what? I mean, no toasters, right? No, all right, good. All right. Okay, on June 24th and 25th, our ham radio operators and Station W2RTM participated in the annual ARRL Field Day outside Building 9032A. I contacted the local CoStar newspaper who came out and gave us a good coverage article, which I have here, thanks to Dr. Forte. And you can read it out there, the copy, and it'll also show up in next month's broadcaster. And it was great. They had a cub reporter, a young lady named Christine Walsh, and I contacted her after the event, thanking her for the coverage and for the photographs and all. And, you know, it was sort of self-serving. I said, you know, we have this event happening on the 22nd of July. Why don't you come by? And she got all enthused about it and excited, and she said she will. So she said she'll show up, give us coverage for our Hamfest tailgate field out in 9032A, and she'll bring a photographer with her. So hope to see her there. I haven't met her. You guys met her. Neville, you met her?
Yes.
Young lady, right?
Yeah.
It's
Nice.
good. It's
Interested in what we were doing.
yeah. I mean, you can, when you read the article, you can see she was eager about it. Yeah. I don't know what they get paid. I know they're young. They're just starting out, and I do know that Corey Ruchtheimer, I think his name was. He showed up last year, and he was a young guy, very nice guy, really good guy. And so I contacted him, you know, for our field day. And he was nice, but he said, you know, I don't work for that place. I don't work for that place anymore. I guess he has to make money someplace else. But he was very kind that he gave me this lady's number, so that was good. Okay. Any other old business?
In
But
that regard, there was a report
reporter, I don't remember what organization he came from, but Jim spent quite a bit of time talking to him. And we got some very positive press out of that.
We as in
We as in the radio club, the radio museum.
RTM.
I can add to that a little bit.
Please,
Um,
why don't you come up?
It was actually.
Come on up. This can be on Mr. Mevo if possible.
It was actually Bob Maddox who talked to him first, and then based on the fact that he had the journalism angle and the kind of questions he was asking, Bob sent him to me. And he said, oh, this guy knows a lot of good stories, ask him. So I decided to give him, I said, how much time do you have? He said, as much as you need. So I gave him an hour-and-a-half tour of our museum, and a couple times said to him, you know, look, there's a bunch of other museums here. He's like, no, this is good, I'm enjoying this. And he's kind of a freelancer. He reports for a half a dozen different local newspapers. But local people are the ones who are going to show up at our museum, you know. We don't need to be in the New York Times. So I've touched base with him once since then, and he still seems very enthusiastic, both about InfoAge, but particularly about RTM. So,
Well, that's because we have the best museum.
that's what I told him.
Absolutely.
My wife found his article on the InfoAge site, and it said what paper it was in. I don't recall, but it was very positive on the museum.
It was in the Marconi Gram or not? Not yet.
Not yet.
That just came out like 10 days ago.
It may have been at the end of it or something like that. But
I don't remember.
look at the InfoAge site and you'll
On the
Facebook
website. All right.
site and you'll see it. It's a good article.
All right.
I
Hey,
don't know what papers are down there.
well, that's what it is, the Co-Star.
Yeah,
That's what Dr. Forte gave us. That's what he reads. Yeah.
it may be a different article.
All right, great. There's no such thing as bad press, right? All right. All right, any other old business before I go into new business?
I skipped over Scott Keyston in the infirm list. About 3-4 months ago, he has a little dog. He tripped in the kitchen over the dog. He broke both wrists. He needs operations on both wrists. He can't drive for 8-9 months. He's had one operation on the left wrist, I believe, and he's got to wait, and then when that heals, he's going for the right. So he's basically at home.
How do you spell his last name?
Keyston, Keastet. Scott Keyston, remember, Scott Keyston.
Yeah, well, that's what I'll let Marcia know. Send him a goodwill card. Yeah, all right, good. All right. Thank you for letting me know that, too. Okay. All right, new business. Tomorrow, July 15th. This is an unabashed advertisement because Darren called me just before the meeting and said he can't make it. Obviously, he's busy getting everything together for tomorrow. So anybody accuse me of being part of JD Auction Services or getting a cut or anything like that, it's not true. Not yet, anyway. Okay. All right, so July 15th, tomorrow, JD Auction Services will have their third, I believe it's the third, right? I think it's the third, right? Yeah. Third antique radio electronics and audio auction in the Jackson Mills Firehouse, 465 North Country Line Road, Jackson. Jackson what?
County line,
County Line, what did I say?
country line.
Country Line. Yeah, you're right, yeah, I put an R in there, yeah. Okay, and starts at 9, previews are at 8 a.m., and there's over 300 lots, I was told. And some of the lots will benefit our club, thanks to Ray Chase, and some for InfoAge too. And some of them will actually be benefiting other club members too, so that's great. That's what is JD Auction Services. Any comments about that? Wait a minute, where is Ray?
He was here.
No, Ray said he had to go.
Yeah, he's got
Oh,
to deliver his stuff.
well, he's got to work on JD Auction Services. I'm surprised he was here tonight at all. Yeah, all right, good. All right, so How many people have attended JD Auction Services? Oh, good, good, very good, very good. All right. All right. How many people intend to be there tomorrow? All right, good. So, you know, hey, look, it's always good to support, whether, you know, you're going there to buy, you know, it's just, you're supporting the club. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear about, what do you mean maybe? Bill Zukowski, are not, you know, I have to do this now to you, all right? Bill Zukowski says he can pretty much walk there, all right? Meanwhile, it's 100 miles from where I live, and probably everybody else is someplace else. What?
You can pay more than I do.
Yeah, okay. That's true.
Free bagels.
Free bagels and coffee, yes, I brought that to their attention, yeah, all right.
Everything?
All right, so anyway, we'll have a good time. And, you know, I never go anticipating getting anything, but something always, you know, travels home with me. Okay, all right, 1 week from tomorrow, Saturday, July 22nd, is our annual Summer Hamfest Tailgate Swap Meet Show. If you have something to sell, send me an email, radiorich@prodigy.net, 914-589-3751. You know where my contacts are, and you know, you can get a spot. The spots are going well. Obviously, people are watching the weather. I hope to watch the weather too. It's not, look, it's always been in our favor, so I can only hope that all the weather is this weekend and not next weekend, okay? All right. Well, those spaces are already taken.
Yes.
But the one in the fuselage is not yet, so that's open. Okay.
They go for premium.
Yes, they do. What can I say?
How much are the tickets on the raffle for the plane?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. All right. I said free water and bagels, and that was a misnomer because they had only said free coffee, and I put them to the task, and Darren said, no, it's free bagels also. So that's important because now people are really going to show up. Right? Yeah, free is that. All right. All right, good. Okay. All right. And we will also have free bagels at our event too. How about that? But you got to bring your own coffee because I'm not making coffee in 100-degree temperatures. Free water and free bagels. Our setup is 7:15 for vendors, 8 o'clock open to the public. And by noontime, it's pretty much over with. And that's the way it works. And like I said, we will have a very special raffle, but our normal raffle will be, thanks to ARRL and their merch, we will have a, $50 and $50 times 2, 25 times 2 for ARRL merch. And Bob Lewis will be set up, and he will have the catalog for you. And if you win, just go over, give him your coupon, and pick up some merch. Now, getting back to the special raffle, we will be also raffling off an RC-12 guardrail. I believe it's a Beechcraft. I think it was something of that sort.
Yes.
And it happens to be right in the way of our Hamfest. So it'll be a special raffle, as is where is, okay, because I understand the props, you got to put them on yourself. There are no engines, you got to get your own engines. All right, but I know Kevin Dermott, he has a fifth wheel truck, all right, and I'll bet he'll be able to pull that damn thing out of there for you and deliver it, okay? So that'll be part of the special raffle, okay.
The docents are doing quite well right now, this month. We have 4 new people who are
Harry, come on up here and
have
talk.
been volunteering. Do I have too small a voice?
My producer is motioning to me.
Let me shout from this side.
Okay.
We have 4 new people who are participating. George Kelly and Ken Kretsch have already been volunteering, and for example, Ken is going to be there tomorrow, and George did last Sunday, and we have 2 other people. We have James Morandi, who has been there on some of the Wednesdays and working with Ray.
Right.
And we have Bill Slomo, who's working on a new display in the museum.
What kind?
More modern electronics than 1960, which is where we kind of end right now.
So, well, give us an example.
He worked for IBM, let's put it that way, and he has some examples to show.
Okay, all right, great.
So basically on into digital technology, you know.
All right, and the
We have very little of it at the moment.
and the visitor count is
Visitor count
expanding?
is rising, and this past year also, we had, 1,000 kids on the school days. So things are rising.
All right, great, thank you for your report, appreciate
But
it.
we absolutely need people to participate because, you know, the 3 or 4 new guys doesn't make us full all the time. We need all of you to participate as docents if you can. And if you can't, we need you to work on things. So,
Taking that to heart, and it's great that George Kelly and new people, especially Mr. Morandi, he just showed up and all of a sudden he wants to be in, so that's great.
And Ken Kretsch.
And Ken Kretsch, yeah, that's great. It was nice to see Don English there the day. Yeah. Be nice to see him at a meeting too, you know. All right, I know, can't have everything. Yeah, okay. This is the future, our future. I happen to hear on the morning show, WOR, that 2 stations in New Jersey, didn't name the stations, fired their overnight DJs and are now going 100% AI, okay? Jen, you're shaking your head, you know about this? Where someplace else?
Massachusetts, I forget exactly where.
Oh, okay, yeah. Welcome to the future, it's here. Okay. Okay, all right, let me go on to Ham Shack Corner then. The largest 6 Acres Ham Fest is in the East takes place this Sunday, July 16th at Sussex Fairgrounds in Augusta, New Jersey. Who will be attending? Who would like to attend? Depending on the weather, and it's not looking good. Now, it's rain or shine, but that's quite a trip to go up in a storm and then to be disappointed when people aren't there to vent from. Don't mean it ill will by any means. I only hope it works. I think, I think Ralph was saying that. Fred was saying that you go, you go a couple of 100 miles this way or 50 miles that way, and next thing you know, it's clear skies. So you're up in the mountains. Beautiful area, very nice. All right, entrance fee is $8, and it's until noontime. It's a quick show, and I've been many times, and always walk away with something. Yeah. Make sure you bring a hat, though, boy, especially if you're bald. Okay. All right. All right. All right, next week. ARRL Bulletin 15 ARL B015. All right, what is that? Commercial interest petition to FCC for high power allocation on shortwave spectrum. Let me read you something quick, right? All right. The ad hoc group Shortwave Modernization Coalition petitioned the FCC to allow on multiple bands within the HF 2-25 megahertz range with up to 20 kW, including in bands immediately adjacent to spectrum allocated to the amateur radio service. This group appears to represent high-speed stock trading interests. Now, I'm going to hand that over to John Stoll, who knows a hell of a lot more than I know about that. You're late. Start at 8. Come on, John. You gave a good dissertation last night on the Zoom.
Well, when you're dealing with the stock market, you live and die with data. And the data has to be very accurate and timely. Suffice to say that you're going to need reception levels of like, S9 plus 20 in order to guarantee that your data is accurate all the time. It will be encrypted and so on and so forth. But the idea is there are a lot of different requirements for data. If you're going to buy a stock, for example, okay, you have to indicate an interest, then you get a confirmation on that, then you can purchase it, you get a confirmation that you purchased it, now you have to get a confirmation on the price that you're going to pay for it, and so on and so forth. So there's a heck of a lot going on when you're buying and selling. As a result, they require a huge amount of data. And you talk about the storm that unfortunately visited, Highland Park. A lot of times fiber optics, to ensure that it's not disturbed, runs down railroad lines. You don't want it overhead on poles where people can, get drunk and take down, fiber optics and so on and so forth. So the idea is it goes down the railroad lines. Well, you get a flood situation, and now the fiber gets ripped up. So, there's only so many fallback methods you can use simultaneously. And radio pretty much you can do all the time. Of course, you don't want to have any interference. You don't want to have any situations where one service is bothering another. But like I said, there's a lot of requirements all around this. Just reporting, stocks and bond trades to the various government oversight agencies and banking agencies and so on. It takes, a raft of people and servers. There's so much oversight, believe it or not, that occurs that you have full-time staff by the hundreds, and the servers reporting this to the various government agencies. So it turns into a major thing, it really does. But like I said, I could understand why they're looking at radio spectrum, especially since, how can I say it? So many firms have left radio for fiber and so on and so forth. You have data carried on FM stereo radio stations on the SCA channels. Like I said, with television, your closed caption is embedded in the signal. There's a ton of data that's out there all the time. It's just that because of the market and the way it operates, it has a huge capacity need. So I could see them trying to use HF frequencies for this.
All right, thanks, John. You put it in simple language. Thank you very much.
But John,
Yes.
what about all these satellites? Can't they use satellites for communication?
Okay, there's I can address that as a problem. When you use satellite, you need an equatorial satellite, because you can't use a LEO, a low Earth orbit, because it's only overhead for a certain period of time. So now you have to go equatorial. Well, you have already a ton of television and radio stations that have access to that, news wires, government agencies, defense departments of various countries, because NATO members alone are sprinkled all over the place and they're using satellite. So the idea is satellite is pretty well saturated. The biggest problem though is that for you, from your house to get to a satellite is about 22,500 miles one way. Now double that, and you're talking about significant latency. So that means that the data has to travel so far and then come back. And one of the things that screws you up is what we're expecting now, rain. C and KU are basically wiped out by very heavy precipitation. So satellite is nice, but it's good for listening to podcasts or watching movies. But past that point, you need a lot of redundancy because satellite's susceptible to so many things.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
There's also a claim of speed.
Well, it's all about speed, yeah.
Yeah,
Milliseconds off of the,
yes,
the trade.
I mentioned latency, yes. There was a book, quite some time ago called Flash Boys. And those were guys, I'll keep it short, okay?
No, you're doing great.
Those were guys who realized latency is the big thing, meaning that if you're 500 miles away, or 100 miles away, or 50 miles away, there's a faster response time to the 50 than there is the 500 or the 100. So, in all honesty these days, all of the exchanges cut out latency issues very dramatically. Yes, that's only for the big boys, but there are hosting firms where you can do this on your own. There's a firm with a high-speed line from a comm room, and so you would run your software on a server in the hosting site to communicate. But yes, latency is the big thing. And with Flash Boys, those were guys who actually ran on their own. They ran fiber optic through backyards. They pretended that they had easements and right-of-way, and they did all sorts of stuff. But then they made a fortune because they were cutting out the fact that instead of using the Bell system microwave, you got a microwave receiver, it comes in, now it has to be broken down, the signal, because it's multiplexed. What has to go which direction? So that goes to another transmitter, and so on and so forth. And so you do this, every 50, 90, 17 miles, it adds latency. And these guys who ran fiber optic through people's backyards and, like I say, down driveways, and they did all sorts of crazy stuff. But they started making a ton of money because they were not having to go through all of that. With fiber, it's the speed of light almost. You're using, basically lasers to communicate with light, and so it's very, very fast. There's, last note, there's one exchange, IEX. They believe in equality. And if you trade on IEX, they figure out the latency from your servers to their system, and they actually will put in a little speed bump or a big speed bump. So everybody has the exact same arrival time to buy at IEX. So the world's really crazy. There's all sorts of stuff going on. But, well, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
That was good.
Yeah. I try to surround myself with smart people, and it works. And in lieu of that, too, while I was making my report last night, I happened on Ria Jaram, our former director of Hudson Division, ARRL, and she has her own website, of course, and she puts out YouTube videos, and she's got, I was going to play it, but it's 12 minutes. I won't do that. And she breaks it down really well, having to do with our ham radio hobby. And I'll post it on, I'll share it tomorrow on the communicator. But something she said, not so much that it interferes with us, which, ham radio, it's more the splash of us interfering with them. So it's more they're going to get hurt by it than ham radio operators are going to get hurt by it. So that's the more interesting part too. So we'll keep posted. We'll see what happens. This is all in the FCC's hands right now, and I'm sure it'll go comments for the next year probably. But hey, again, it's our future. It's here. Okay, that's it for me. That's enough. Yes.
I read somewhere there's I think it's W6LG on the YouTube. He says comments are ending on the 31st of July. It was kind of buried in the back rooms since March.
Yeah.
When they were available for comments, but nobody knew about it until about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
Right. All right, Fred, thank you.
If you have a comment, get it in.
Okay. All right, let's have a quick break, a sale of a 50/50 tickets, and Al Clays will give us his presentation on radio test equipment. So make it short, guys, okay? Make it short.
Everybody's like falling asleep. Is there any air conditioning in this room?
Didn't seem to go on.
It was so nice and warm, everybody's like sitting back.
No, I have like, long, it's like, he's saying,
Find a seat, find a seat. Find a seat. Find a seat. Okay, we have a grand total of $14 this evening, I tell you. What are you laughing at? That's the last time we had $3.
A lot more than that.
Okay. All right, so need to find someone to pick the winning ticket. The newbie's got his hands full right at the moment, but, okay. We'd like you to pick the winning ticket.
Can I put money in there as a non-member?
Something like that,
It's a little too late.
because, you know, just like.
Okay? All right, now look,
Decent map of any city.
we usually arrange, see, if you had played the new guy, we always arrange that he wins. But since you, this works out better, because now you didn't participate, so when you win, you can't, so don't worry about it.
Let's go with the commission. Oh, I see. What if you don't like the guy who wins?
That happens a lot.
Oh, okay.
We pick another ticket. Okay, listen up. For the grand total of $14 this evening, okay? The winning ticket is 4, 7, 1, 9, 3, 4, 9. 3, 4, 9.
that takes care of it, because I probably lost my
Only 14?
If you want to do it next time, you want to?
Let it ride.
Ride?
Well, there's a processing fee that comes to $10.95, so you get $3.15.
Congratulations, Doug.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, that was always fun. Okay. Okay, so this evening we have our very own technical coordinator, Al Craze, and Mr. Carlson. He'll be arriving. He's a little late tonight, but he'll be arriving later. That's his laboratory. And Al will be telling us all about test equipment and how we use test equipment and how much test equipment we need and how much we don't need. How about that? All right? Al, take it away.
Okay, you have a mic for me?
Sure do. You don't want it in your whiskers, because otherwise you're going to get a
I'll trust you.
All right, there you go.
Okay. Well, so we had somebody else set up for this month, and it fell through, and Rich says to me, will you talk about test equipment? Well, okay, now, test equipment means different things to different people. About a third of you guys spent half your life looking into an oscilloscope, and you never met a piece of test gear you didn't love, and you've accumulated stuff like this. So, you know, collecting test equipment can be a hobby unto itself, but it might also be a disease. There are different grades of test equipment. Most of what we're familiar with is the hobbyist stuff, you know, the Heath kits and the Radio Shack stuff, and, you know, that's what was accessible and affordable. There's a higher grade of test equipment that was used by the service guys, the working man's tools from Simpson, B&K, RCA, Hickok, people like that. And then there's the laboratory stuff that got used in the development labs where money was no object, that they really wanted to have the deal. And there's a lot of this around. It's cheap in the surplus market. And so from a certain standpoint, why mess around with anything else when you can find really good stuff? Categories, you've got meters of various sorts, oscilloscopes, bunch of this testers, tube testers, we now have component testers, signal tracers, things like that. Signal generators, sources of signal to test and align radios, and various accessories, and then some exotic stuff. We'll talk about each of these in turn. So let's just concentrate on the basic stuff you need to work on antique radios. And so we'll kind of go through that. The first is the VOM, the volt-ohm milliammeter. This is the basic electrical test instrument. Goes way back into the 1930s. In fact, when you read the books about radio repair, this is almost all the guy had, and maybe a signal generator. They're set up so they read volts, ohms, and milliamps. They're portable, they're battery power. There's a battery for the resistance measurements. You don't need the batteries for current and voltage. The downside to these things is it limits the current to, say, 50 microamps for whatever voltage is coming in here. And the better instruments had 50 microamp meters, and they'll have this specification 50,000 ohms per volt. And what that means is if you put it on the 1 volt scale, stick it in a circuit, you've just stuck a 50,000 ohm resistor into the circuit, instrument like this. But they're usable, and of course they're analog. They have a swinging needle, which is kind of nice when you go to align something. Most of these things, most of the more expensive ones have mirrored scales so that you can carefully read the pointer to pretty high accuracy that you'd have trouble doing if there wasn't a mirror in behind it. Next step above that is the so-called vacuum tube voltmeter. We use an amplifier to amplify the input signal so that we're not loading down the circuit quite so much. Most of these are about 10 or 11 megohms on the input. Usually requires AC power because they have tubes in them. You'll have a set of probes that goes with them. Really fancy one is the HP 410, Hewlett-Packard 410. And this thing has a probe down here that will measure AC voltages up to 700 megahertz because they have a vacuum diode in that probe to do the rectification right at the point where they're making the measurement. You don't need that, but that's how fancy these things got. Moving forward in time, we get solid-state versions of vacuum tube voltmeters. You start using FET transistors instead of voltmeters. Consequently, you have the so-called FET VOM. Radio Shack, Microna had some. Everybody made these. These are more desirable because they act like a VTVM, but you're generally battery powered, although this HP, this 427, one of my favorites, is AC powered. You can put a 22.5 volt battery in it and run it for a while, but you generally don't do that. But these are useful instruments. You need a volt ohm milliammeter. These can be real useful. The oscilloscope. Now, if you only had one test instrument, you probably want it to be a scope, a good scope, because a professional scope not only displays the waveforms, but it will measure AC and DC voltages, and most of them are pretty sensitive, like you're wondering if the oscillator's running in this radio. You just stick the probe down beside the tuning cap and you can see the RF signal that it's going. So I highly recommend oscilloscopes. There's a problem with an oscilloscope. You walk up to it and you get that sensation. Oh my God, what do we do now? First problem is finding the power switch. I mean, there's so much going on these things. So you got to learn to fly an oscilloscope. And years ago, our scope school, somebody coined the term for it, scopes for dopes, and maybe we need to do that again one of these days and go through oscilloscopes. RF signal generators. Okay, if you're going, especially if you're going to align a radio, you have to have some known source of RF to do that too. And there's vast arrays of things. One of the traditional favorites is the HP 606. There's one of these in the RTM shop if you want to play with it sometime. This thing is bigger than a bread box, however. Okay. It only goes up to 55 megahertz, so it's not going to take care of FM if you need to work on an FM set or a TV set. Standard signal generator, one of the things they do is as you tune across the band, the output level remains constant. So like if you wanted to do a frequency measurement across something, it would do that. Also, the modulation level remains constant. This is not the case with cheap instruments. So if you're down to actually making measurements, you know, I swear this receiver will hear down to 2 microvolts. Well, this is the kind of instrument you need to do that. Because the output meter more or less tells you the range of decibels, and then there is a calibrated attenuator, and you can go all the way down to like -90 dBm, which is a teeny tiny signal, and that's how those sensitivity measurements get made. Nice instrument, kind of big. It's tubes, so they're not too difficult to work on if necessary. Slightly newer one, and we have one of these in the shop as well, HP 8640. This is solid state. It goes up to 1,000 megahertz. AM and FM modulation. Digital readout here. The digital readout can also be used with an external input to act as a frequency counter, so it's got that going for it. These are heavy. The gears attached to the band switch. If you beat them up, they strip out, and then you're SOL. And they can be hard to work on, but if you come into one of these, use it as long as it works. I have one on my bench. Now, this is one that Neville pointed out to me. A little bit newer, a little bit lighter HP 8601. This will get up to 110 megahertz, does AM and FM, and it will do a sweep. There's some FM alignments, and especially television alignments, that want you to use a sweep generator to sweep a signal across it, and you look at the output on your oscilloscope, and you get a graph of the response of the circuit. And these are a reasonable size. They're about this big in the front. It's obviously a portable. It has a handle on top of it. So kind of a nice meter. Now, probably for most of us, you'll end up with something like this. In fact, I picked up one of these just recently, RCA. It's very simple. It does have modulation. It does cover the frequency range. It does have a vernier knob on it. And it will do the job. There's some cases where you need to take some other steps, like a frequency counter or something, if you need to put it exactly on frequency. But realistically, if you pick up a Heathkit or a ICO or something, simple generator like this, that's probably all you need. It's a whole lot better than nothing. Now, caution about signal generators, especially the fancy ones. The output from that attenuator is 50 ohms. And that's designed to go into the antenna input of a receiver. Well, you put a pair of clip leads on there and go poking around inside a radio, you hook it to 300 volts into 50 ohms, you've just trashed the attenuator, you got a big expensive repair, you probably throw the instrument away. So the solution for that is you need a blocking capacitor, like a 600 volt cap, in series with your test leads to make sure you don't damage your signal generator. People miss that. It makes me crazy. You see them just reaching for test leads or BNC cables or something, and yeah, you gotta do that. There are some inexpensive RF signal generators on the market. I've not looked at these. Like the expensive one here was a little over $100. This thing was like $30. This one, but most of these, they're what they call function generators. They generate a sine and a square wave and maybe some other weird waveforms that make no sense to anybody, but they're inexpensive. And like this one is, most of these are digital, so they're on frequency. This one, and these were all things found on Amazon. I should have got the names, but there's stuff like this. This one actually has AM modulation, so that'd be usable if that's the route you decide to go here. But you kind of need a signal generator and a meter of some sort, and a scope. Tube testers. You also probably ought to have a tube tester. You're working on tube radios. These tubes are all 70, 80 years old, and so you get to a point where you need to understand this. There's two general types of tube testers. The inexpensive ones, originally inexpensive ones, are what are called emission testers. They take the tube, they connect all the grids in the plate together, and they run it like a diode and make sure that you're getting current coming off the cathode. Because what happens with tubes is the emissivity of the cathode wears out over time, the tube gets tired and it doesn't work. So for 95% of the cases, that's all you need to do is make sure the cathode isn't tired. So like I say, you need a tube tester of some sort, 40, 50 bucks, maybe you luck into one even cheaper. That'll take care of you. The expensive ones are called mutual conductance testers. And what these things do is they connect the tube in an amplifier circuit. They run an AC signal into it and measure the signal coming out. So you're measuring the mutual conductance, the gain of the tube. And in laboratory cases, this probably gets important. Maybe you're trying to match tubes so they're all the same. And the really famous one is Hickok 539. You'll notice a lot of switches, 3 meters on this thing. And eBay prices, you start talking, pushing $1,000 or something for one of these that's working. We have one of those in the shop too, if you want to come and take a look at it and play with it. But like I said, you probably need a tube tester of some sort. Okay, the wave of the future, modern test equipment. Of slave labor in China. And this includes digital multimeters, digital oscilloscopes, and a new instrument called a component tester, and we'll take a look at these. Here's a DVM. I discovered these about 3 years ago. I've saturated my life with these. 20 bucks a throw. In fact, this brand is no longer available, but there's other instruments like this. Okay, it's 3.5 digits. In the old days, that was a big deal in a digital meter. Volts, ohms. It'll measure capacitance. It'll measure frequency up through the audio range. It will generate square waves. You need a kilohertz signal to do a quick test. You set this over to the square wave position and crank it up to the frequency you want. It's got a thing up here called the non-contact voltage sensor. You want to know if this piece of Romex has power on it and which side is which. You just hold the thing up there, it'll detect it. There's a backlight on the display. There's a flashlight up here. The damn thing makes beer and predicts eclipses, and it doesn't cost anything. And so that's typical of what's on the market. Don't be afraid of them. Buy one. One sidelight to this, I looked into this a little bit. I still haven't found quite the right answer. There are multimeters that will talk to you, okay? Because a lot of times you're in the set and you're trying to get 2 test leads where you want them, and then you're craning your neck trying to read the instrument. And I had one that had a special test lead that you pushed the button, it would talk. Somehow that test lead died and it got messed up. And I picked up another one. I've only used it a little bit, but it Bluetooths the voice out to your cell phone. So you can sit there and make measurements, so it'll tell you what's going on. So like I say, brave new world. Here, now that other one, that was like the last generation of digital multimeters. Here's a newer one. Instead of a switch, they have a big LCD display, and you push buttons, and indicator here tells you what function you're on. One of the maybe alluring things about this, and I haven't used one, but there's a bar graph down here, which may fill in for the swinging meter needle when you need it, if they did it right. Also, one of the things on a lot of these instruments, they come with a temperature probe. If you want to know how hot your transformer is running, you plug this in, you stick the probe against the thing, it'll tell you the temperature. Again, no money, nice big display. Look around Amazon. Okay, the component testers. A while back, somebody invented these while they were playing with an Arduino microcontroller. Now, modern microcomputers don't just compute. They've got analog, they've got digital, as the clocks are controlled by crystals. They know they can measure time real accurately, and they got enough processing power that they can go out and just search the inputs to the thing and figure out what component is hanging on it. These things generally have one of these zero insertion force IC sockets on here. You pull the lever up, this opens up, you stick your component in, it clamps down on it. Only 3 of those pins do anything. I mean, they're parallel to other ones, but really 1, 2, and 3. And in some cases, you'll want to extend that out to clip leads to get at some external component. But what these things do, you turn it on, wakes up, tells you you've got a good battery on it. If you don't put anything in it, it comes up and tells you, well, I don't know what's going on here. However, you do something like, here's a potentiometer plugged into 1, 2, and 3. It figures out that it's 2 resistors, tells you what the values are in 4 digits. Likewise, you stick a capacitor in there, it'll tell you the value. There's this characteristic called effective series resistance, which in some cases, like with switching power supplies, gets to be an issue. Radio use, that's not going to bother you too much, but they'll test ESR. Measure inductors. This guy just stuck an audio transformer in there. He hit pin 1 and pin 3, measures the inductance as well as the resistance of the coil he plugged into it. You plug a transistor in there, doesn't matter which way you plug it in, it goes out and sorts out pin 1's the emitter, pin 2's the base, pin 3's the collector, measures the HFE, that's the current gain, that's the important parameter. Also tells you the forward voltage across here, which in this case 0.675 millivolts, that tells you that it's a silicon transistor. You plugged it in, it figured this out 7 seconds later. It'll do the same thing with MOSFETs, field effect transistors. So real handy things to have, you know, $30 or so. Buy one with a nice case rather than one of these ones hanging out naked, but you probably ought to have a component tester. Digital oscilloscopes. Now this is kind of another case of the brave new world. I own a couple of really nice analog oscilloscopes, and I was a little skeptical about this, but I went out and bought this thing just so I'd be able to talk about it. And this is sort of a moderate priced one. Somebody will have to explain to me about the Chinese and consonants. this particular model is sold under a couple of brand names. I selected Yapuk because I could pronounce it as opposed to this FNIRSI thing. But anyway, it's a dual channel, 100 megahertz bandwidth scope, and it has a signal generator. DDS is direct digital synthesis, has a signal generator built into it. The ads claimed that it was 1 megahertz, and I said, well, that isn't really great, but I can at least do an IF alignment with that and maybe do the high end of the broadcast band on a harmonic of a square wave or something. But when I actually got it, I discovered it's a 10 megahertz signal generator. So you get all this in one shot. It's only about this thick, about this long, nice big screen. Doesn't weigh anything. Runs on a 5-volt wall wart. Generates some RF noise, but well, I guess we can tolerate that. Some of the brand names for digital scopes, the guys who have been around for a while, I guess some of these are Japanese, are Siglet, Handtech, and Regal. But, you know, spend your money, take your chances, but so far I'm pretty happy with this guy. It's not only a regular oscilloscope, it's a storage scope. You press a button, it takes a picture of what's on the screen, and you can offload that on USB later on. This was the output of WINS while I was working on a radio, set up for DC in a 10X probe. It tells you here that the peak-to-peak voltage here was 4.28 volts. It tells you that the average voltage down here was minus 261. That's actually, this is 0 up here. That's actually the DC component of the detected radio signal. We'll talk about that a little more because that's in effect signal strength. But anyhow, you get all this information right on the screen. If you had the other channel hooked up, that'd be down here as well. Isolation transformers. If you're going to work on AC/DC sets, you maybe need one of these. The fact of the matter is you can work on an AC/DC set without an isolation transformer as long as you're not standing ankle deep in water or insist upon holding onto a faucet while you're doing it. Okay, you get the plug in the right way around and it's not too bad. That's what I've always said. And I'm looking at a Zenith, is you take a scope probe from a grounded scope and you clip the ground lead in the wrong place in the radio and you burn the ground lead off the test probe. Okay, so you're going to mess around with AC/DC sets. You need an isolation transformer. I had one about 3 or 4 months ago. I screwed up wiring a power cord, plugged it in, left it sit there and burned out my transformer. So I was looking for another one. The only ones I really found, you may remember the Jameco company. They're doing business through Amazon. They sold me a 300-watt transformer for $50. Transformers are iron and copper. They're always expensive. 300 watts is probably enough to do TV sets. So that's not, if you got to do that, that's probably a good choice. And when you're trolling the flea markets, you find an isolation transformer, buy the thing because it's a useful thing to have if you're going to work on AC/DC sets. Here's kind of an off-the-wall one, but I just thought I'd troll this by because they're really handy. Tube socket adapters. And the military had this set of these things, and if you see a set of these, grab them. And what you got is a tube base that has a socket on top of it, and then there's contacts around the outside here. Because you get into some of these radios and the wiring is really crammed. You're having a lot of trouble getting in there to make measurements where you need to make it. You pull the tube out, you stick this thing in, you stick the tube in, and now you can just go around the tube pins and make your measurements from outside. You don't really need this, but if you see one, glom onto it.
I got a question.
Yes.
Is this supposed to be like a test socket, or is it an adapter?
It's just an extender for the tube that gets you contacts out here.
Yeah, I thought, I was making sure there was no distinction between a test.
tube tester are different. They don't have the contacts around the outside.
No, I meant like a test, I was.
Or one that went into some kind of test set or something. No, these are same thing out the top as comes in the bottom.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Just male pins on the bottom and female on top. Just thought I'd throw that in there because I'm really glad I own this. Every once in a while, it just saves your butt. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about how you use test equipment. And like it or not, you got to learn to read schematics. Okay? And here's an All-American 5. And I highlighted the signal path through this thing. Signals come into the grid of a tube, they come out the plate, get to the grid of the next tube, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My trick with AA5s, in fact, I learned this in signal school up at Fort Monmouth. They had a room full of All-American 5s with bugs in them. And they made us spend a week in there working on these. And by the end of the week, I could find any bug in any one of those radios in 30 seconds. Okay? And where you start is right here at the volume control. You turn the volume control all the way up. You take your finger and your screwdriver and you touch that. If you hear the hum and the click out the speaker, then you know this half of the radio is good and you got a power supply. You know, if that's no good, well, then you check the power supply and start working on these points here. And then from there, you can come back here, feed a signal in here, see if it comes through. In some cases, just a screwdriver or a piece of wire from an antenna, you can get enough noise fed in to know what's going on. If you're good here and you're still not hearing anything, then you got to wonder whether this oscillator is running, and that's when either you wave a scope probe in here, or a running oscillator is going to end up with a small negative voltage on the grid there. You could measure that voltage with your voltmeter. But so you're signal tracing to the bad stage. You got this whole radio, and this is a simple radio. You might have 15 tubes, and well, now what's going on here? You got to get down to the tube. You get down to the suspect tube. Now, let me talk a little bit about signal injectors. These are devices that generate broadband noise, both audio and RF, and you can just stick them on a tube grid and squirt a signal into the radio you're working on. This particular one, I have one of these, came from a USM-3A test tool set. This was a box of stuff the Navy had. I think it was so they could give it to guys on PT boats, and then they wouldn't be a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest when their radio broke. The box contains all kinds of test equipment, even a tube tester and substitution boxes for components and whatnot. But this thing, and this is just an electromechanical buzzer. There's a penlight battery in there. You push on the back of it, it buzzes, signal comes out. In fact, it's really fancy because when you turn the back knob here, it varies the output capacitance, so you can actually vary the signal. Don't know where you'd get one of those. However, you can pretty easily build a signal injector. High-speed logic chips, and it's pretty easy. 2 inverters, two resistors, and a capacitor makes a square wave oscillator. You set it up for about 1 kilohertz. Use another gate or something to buffer it out. Blocking capacitor, so when you stick this into a 400 volt radio, it's not going to get into trouble. And that ends up, looking like this. I put an LED on it so I can tell if it works, and I won't bother demoing it right now, but that'll make noise in a radio, and you can work your way to the bad stage. Inside that thing, it's real simple, just a little piece of perf board with those components on it, battery holder, the LED. This piece of brass here is connected to ground in there so that when you wrap your hand around this, you got sort of a ground path out of it. And in most cases, you don't have to worry about a ground connection to the radio. You just stick it in there and squirt a signal into it and pick your way through the stages. The other way to do that is with what's called the signal tracer. And the the traditional ones are like this Heathkit. It's an audio amplifier. This one even has an I-tube indicator on it. And this probe has a switch on it so that in the audio position, it's just capacitors feeding through into the amp. You put it in the RF position, there's a diode in there, so it'll detect an AM signal and get you audio out of the thing. I see some with high gain amplifiers. Looking for something that you want to spend 3 or 4 evenings getting this thing together and building it, well, go ahead, but maybe you need it, maybe you don't. The one I saw that was actually sensitive enough that the guy could go in and hear the noise from silver mica disease in his All-American 5 and tell which terminal it was. Anyway, signal injectors and signal tracers to find your way to the bad stage. Now, when you get to the suspect stage, you come in, you measure the voltages. If you're lucky, the schematic will have some voltages on it. If not, you got to know enough about tubes that the plate and the screen grid are going to have high voltage on them. The cathode's going to be either 0 or, if there's a resistor down here, a low voltage when the tube's pulling some current. And the grid voltage is probably going to be low. This is an IF amp, so it might be negative when you have automatic volume control coming back around here. But you go bing, bing, bing. For instance, if you have voltage here and no voltage there, what's wrong? Yeah, that winding's open. So you find the bad circuit, and then if necessary, you take your ohm meter and pick out the bad component and take care of it. Cases where I've kind of refused to change a tube for far too long and wasted a lot of time that way, but when in doubt, change the tube. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that automatic volume control situation, because this is the most important circuit in your radio that you can't see. The IF signals, 455, come out here. One side of that transformer goes to a diode plate. The other side of that diode goes to ground. So you end up with detected signal on this side of the transformer. This resistor and these capacitors are a low-pass filter. They get rid of the RF. And so now you have a signal here that goes to the volume control that's the AC audio running on the DC rectified current from the carrier. So the audio comes over here, gets capacitively coupled into the amplifier tube, but the DC component goes through a high value resistor here and out this bus and into the grids, into the control grids of the amplifier tubes. And when that voltage goes more negative, it turns the gain of the tubes down. So that's how AVC works. Now, it's good to understand that. In fact, one of the trouble spots, it's often a 2.2 meg resistor here, and a lot of them have drifted high to 5 meg, and now the AVC doesn't work right. And so always take your ohm meter to that resistor. But if you monitor the DC voltage at this point, it's in essence what on a communications receiver is called an S meter. That voltage is equal to the signal strength, so when you tune a station or you make adjustments to the tuning of the IF, you see that voltage change. The traditional radio techs don't tell you this. They have you putting an AC meter on the output at the speaker output and measuring the tone from the signal generator coming through there. Well, yeah, that's okay. The tone gets annoying and all of that. But now that we have high impedance meters and oscilloscopes, it's a whole lot smarter to monitor that voltage right there when you do an alignment. So let's see here. Okay, we're going to take a look at my brand new oscilloscope doing an IF alignment at 455. Now in the beginning of this video, you'll see the signal come down. That's while I'm I took the two ends of my test lead, shorted them together, I'm looping them around the corner of the radio to catch the ferrite loop, and you'll see how this goes. This one. Okay, there we're getting the signal into the set. This is the DC at that point. Okay, now I took my screwdriver and I adjust the first IF can. Now you're looking for a peak, you're looking for the maximum value back past the peak, make sure you have a peak. So you got the first one. I move to the second one, get even more signal out, again looking for a peak. I just did 2 of them in this video, but you'd have 4 adjustments to do. So that's how you do an IF alignment with 455 signal coming into the set. Now, this is a technique I developed a year or 2 ago. I kind of think this is pretty cool. If you don't have a signal generator, but you do have a modern radio, digital radio, you can align your set off the air using these things. Now, the key to this is something called a beat frequency oscillator. If an unmodulated RF signal comes into an AM receiver, maybe the receiver gets quiet, but you don't hear anything. And that's the case with Morse code up in the short wave bands. And so what you have is what's called a beat frequency oscillator that generates another almost 455 signal. And so you hear the difference in the frequencies here. And so what your modern radios, they don't even talk about BFOs or CW or any of that stuff. They talk about single sideband, SSB, which is a suppressed carrier form of radio, and to hear it properly, you have to put the carrier back in with a beat frequency oscillator. So if you have a radio like this, you can use it to determine the frequency of the local oscillator in the set you're working on. And it goes kind of like this. To align the IF, you find a station that you know what its frequency is. Nice loud one, because I'm assuming the radio works somewhat. Let's say you tune your radio with the BFO to 1225, and then you adjust the tuning on the radio you're working on until you can hear the 0 beat in the receiver. And when you're on 0 beat, that means the local oscillator is exactly here, and that means the IF frequency to the 455. Now, do people understand 0 beat? No. Let me see if I can demonstrate here. Here's my sideband. Now with a sideband receiver, you can only hear that from one side. And then that means this radio is tuned accurately to the station, which in this case happens to be 1350, and it's not very strong in here. But now you've got a 455 signal in your IF, and you can go ahead and align it. Let me get my controller rather than my signal injector. And so you do the IF, and then for the RF, the alignment instructions will usually give you a low frequency and a high frequency. You say its low frequency is 600, you add 455 to that. Listen for your oscillator there and verify that you're on the 600 mark on your tuning dial. At the high end, maybe it's 1500. you verify you're on 1500, and you do the oscillator trimmer to put it on the mark on the radio. So you can do it, you know, and you get a nice radio out of the deal. This is a Texan PL880, by the way. They're about $160. They're pretty nice sets. There may be some more inexpensive ones that do sideband. I haven't looked at it closely. Let's watch tuning a station on the scope. And here you see the signal strength increasing and the audio coming up. You might even hear it. And peaking it, tuning off, tuning back onto the frequency. That's, in essence, your AVC voltage. Pardon me? Scope probe on that test point I showed you just past the detector. Back.
Okay.
Let's, right here.
The line control or after the resistor?
Pardon me?
At the line control or after the
Well, you got to read the schematic. In this case, it's the top of the volume control. Sometimes there's some other stuff going on there, but a lot of radios, it's right at the top of the volume control. It's in this circuit before you get to the high value resistor.
So that 3 meg is like a quantum voltage divider, maybe?
Well, the 3 meg is the 3 meg in this cap out here are a low pass filter that get rid of the audio on the AVC voltage. If you don't do that, the audio will demodulate the signal. It'll turn the gain down when the audio goes up. And yes.
Putting the test probe there, you're getting an AC signal in the scope.
Well, yeah, no, your audio plus the rectified carrier, which is a DC. So, the Fed will declare the inflation fight over. Anyway, a couple of other things. Variacs and dim bulb testers. Like I say here, opinions are like earlobes. Everybody has a couple of them. My opinion is horseshit. Okay, there's this school of thought, you have a radio, you don't know if it's any good, you plug it in, we'll bring it up slow on a variac. Well, what the hell does that do? First of all, the tubes aren't going to warm up until you get partway into the voltage, and this, that, and the other thing. The other thing is the dim bulb tester. You can plug a radio in there, and you can judge whether the radios are short or not. If you're going to work on a radio, you ought to open it up and take a look at it, step one. And then when you do plug it in and turn it on, watch the rectifier tube. If the plate turns red, turn it off. Okay, you're not going to burn out your power transformer in 30 seconds or a minute, okay? And that's all you need to do. And so, yeah, if you feel good about having constructed a dim bulb tester and having it take up space on your bench, well, go ahead and do it, but it's just not where I'm at. What I do use sometimes is one of these things. Yes, plugs into an outlet. You plug your device in here. It'll measure the voltage. It'll measure the current. It'll even calculate the watts. So like you have a radio, it says it consumes 35 watts, and you think it might not be doing that. You can plug it in and see what's going on. These things will even accumulate kilowatt hours if you're, into some energy economy thing or something where you're trying to figure out how much power your refrigerator uses. Anyway, I don't know, these things are $30 sort of stuff, and not too bad to have, and they're that small, and they'll do the job. Another thing I like, if you happen into one, is a variable bench supply, a high voltage supply. This one's a Heath kit. The high voltage is controlled by one knob. There's also a current knob, well, high voltage, and then there's a current meter. This thing also supplies 6 and 12 volts for filaments if you need to, if you're building a circuit and working on it. It also supplies a C voltage. And so this is good if you're developing something The other thing it's good for, if you have a radio that has some internal power problem and you just can't figure it out, you take the rectifier tube out, you connect this DC supply into the input of the filter caps, get the filaments going, and now you can ramp this voltage up and watch what's going on inside the radio without causing any damage. So if you see, this is one of those things, if you see it, grab it. You don't really need it, but if one comes along, they're nice to have. Soldering equipment. Now, many of us for years just used those Weller temperature-controlled soldering stations because either we filched one from work or we bought one cheap at a Hamfest or things like that. And they were good. They're temperature-controlled. They don't burn the tips out by sitting there without using them. But they do wear out. The heaters wear out. They're getting expensive to repair. Who uses more soldering irons in the world than the Chinese? They have this under control, believe me. I bought one of these soldering stations, then I bought another one for the shop. These was, I think, $54. You have a knob here that sets the thing to the temperature you want, Fahrenheit or centigrade, you get your choice. Comes with some accessories. Nice stand. These Brillo pad tip cleaners work pretty well. If I was doing a lot of soldering, I'd use the wet sponge, but you walk up to the thing, the sponge is dry, and well, you can just use the Brillo pad and clean it up. The thing that's wrong now, like I said, it's about $54, but even these cheap things, and this one plugs directly into AC, has a digital readout on the handle here. You set it to the temperature you want. These all use these hollow tips, which were originally designed by a Japanese company called Heiko. The problem is these sets of tips they give us with these things are hopelessly small for the things that we are soldering. These were done for the little tiny ones for soldering surface mount components and stuff like that. You try to use this in a tube radio, you're going to be pretty disappointed. And the solution there is to buy some fat tips for it. This particular Heiko number I've been using, you get 5 for $10 from Amazon. Just buy the 5 of them. You'll be in tips for, they'll sell 2 of them with your estate when you're done. But that's the, you need a good soldering iron, and those are good solutions. Wouldn't at all be afraid of that. Frequency counter. There's situations like with or even any signal generator that doesn't have a digital readout. You might want to really put it dead on 455. You might be tuning up a shortwave set or something and really want it on frequency. So frequency counters are good. There's, lab grade ones. I have a Hewlett Packard kind of like this, but you can even go out. This is I think it was $8 kit. This comes all knocked down and you have to solder it together. But it's a 50 megahertz counter and it will also test quartz crystals. I mean, not a bad thing if you don't have a counter of some sort. I put this slide in here especially for Richard. He told me to make sure doing ham radio kind of things. And the king of these things is one made by the Measurements Corporation up in Boonton years ago. In fact, Harry Houck was a big wheel in that company. He was Armstrong's right-hand man when he invented the superhet. But what these things have is a meter. Some of them are in one piece. This one's in 2 pieces. There's a tube out here and a variable capacitor. You plug a coil into it, and now it's an oscillator at some frequency. At some frequency, and the meter here reads the grid current on the oscillator. And when you couple that tuned circuit to another tuned circuit at the same frequency, it sucks power out of the oscillator, and you see a dip in the grid meter, so you know what frequency you're on. There's inexpensive ones like from Heathkit. when you pick one of these up, make sure you get the coils. They're kind of useless without them. This one has coils all the way up into little horseshoe-shaped guys for UHF and down into the broadcast band on this end. There's some other functions of these things. You can use them in some cases to tune up antennas. In some cases you can lay a quartz crystal across them and observe a dip when you tune through the crystal frequency. The Model 59 is a switch up here. In the middle position, it's a grid dip meter. You put it in the right position that says diode. It's just a diode detector, and so if you're sniffing out RF in a transmitter or something, you can do that and determine its frequency by tuning to it. And then it has a modulated position where they take 120 hertz filtered off their power supply and use it to modulate the RF. So now you got a humming signal that you can hear in your receiver and use it to do an alignment. So they're handy. Again, this is sort of a secondary instrument, but if you happen into one, there's cases where they can be useful. And in fact, I used one of these last week working on taking a look at the Wheeler patent model receiver that's in the museum. Determined that that it is a super het and the IF frequency is about 220 kilohertz. Anyhow, grid dip meters. Audio stuff. This may be Scott's department. You're working on radios, this is probably not the deal, but you start in on hi-fi and amplifiers and that kind of stuff. Probably need an audio signal generator. You need some sort of AC voltmeter that'll read down to really low values, like maybe minus 80 dBm. That's a really small signal. It's just a couple of millivolts. When you try to make those measurements, you really need a low-pass filter on the input of the meter. Otherwise, you're getting RF and noise and things like that, and you're never sure what you're reading. The other part of that is that most of these meters will have an output on them. You feed the output into your oscilloscope, and now when you get down there, you can see what you're reading. You know, you're putting a test signal in, and you get down there and you find it, you're just looking at noise. And so you know what you're reading. When I first encountered this at Gately Electronics years ago, we had an HP 400 vacuum tube thing and a external low-pass filter to take care of that. I since found another HP meter that has a low-pass filter built into it. And so that works real nice for this. You need a scope. There's instruments called distortion analyzers that will measure total harmonic distortion on a sine wave. That's, like I said, this is engineering stuff if you want to verify that your circuit really works. The other place that distortion analyzer comes in, when you're setting up professional tape recorders, they set the zero level at some specific, tune them up to 1% and set the VU meter to 0, and that's what they do there. Audio spectrum analyzers, that's kind of a newer instrument, but there's cases where you want to see what's going on. You look at a sine wave on a spectrum analyzer, it gives you one spike, and then the harmonics will come up at higher frequencies. You can just look at it and tell pretty much whether it's clean. Interesting thing, there's this piece of free software called the Visual Analyzer. This is the one we run in the hands-on lab. And that'll do most all of that stuff. Here's a fancy 3D spectrum of a sweeping signal. And it'll generate white noise and pink noise and all kinds of stuff. So if you want to play with audio, that's maybe a useful thing. TV sets. You're really getting into deep doo-doo when you start in on a TV set. You have to have your stuff together and you have to have some test equipment. You obviously need an oscilloscope. There's things called bar and dot generators. You replace a color picture tube and you've got to go in and converge the damn thing. You need a high voltage probe because we already had one of those. I already had one of these in the shop stuck into the high voltage end of a TV set. It's dead now. high voltage probe is this plastic thing about this long with a giga-ohm resistor in it or something that makes that drops the voltage down to your normal meter. High voltage probes. Degaussing coils, color TVs, you have this steel shadow mask that gets magnetized to picture. So you have this coil you wave around to degauss them. You get down to cases, CRT testers, flyback testers, RF sweep generators, et cetera, et cetera. You know, they're the devil's spawn. I'll work on them under duress, but I really don't like it. And you have to have your shit together if you're going to work on TVs. Especially Matt, tell them about Predictus, Matt.
I've never worked on one yet because I'm afraid of them, but
I mean, they're so cool.
they're especially difficult because they tried to do small space to make that cool shape. So they made integrated circuits and things, and
Well,
there's no like disconnect for the boards. It's all wire wrapped together.
Yeah, okay.
The real reason people hate them to work on is partly because they were notoriously unreliable, but that big circuit board, which as Matt said, is wire wrapped with, I think it's either a gazillion or an infinite number.
Okay.
But that's to mount it on top of a metal plate, which makes all of the connections inaccessible underneath it. So to do any type of work on it, you either have to unwrap all those wire wrap connections, don't break them, and then put them all back on, or you cut the components at the top, you put a quig on it, which people don't want to do for some reason.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Those dealers didn't even want to sell those sets.
Anyway, it's a whole other world that ain't a radio. Some exotic stuff. I saw one of these here earlier this evening. Tiny spectrum analyzer. It's this big. It'll do RF spectrum analysis way up all the way. That was an expensive one. And again, kind of cool. Vector network analyzers. I almost understand what that means, but this thing will generate a signal that you feed into this thing you're looking at, and then it will measure the voltage and the phase of the signal coming back out, and you generate these things called Smith charts and whatnot. Neville, can you, in a minute, can you tell us what's going on here? Probably not.
It's a receiver and a transmitter.
Yeah.
And you pass the transmitted signal through the thing you're trying to measure, be it a filter or whatever, amplifier stage, and detect the result on a receiver. There's a lot of nifty tricks you can do with it. For instance, it can replace a grid dip meter.
Yeah, you could.
Set it up for its own reflection, which is called S11. You place a few turns on a BNC connector or whatever fits the darn thing, and bring it near to the circuit, you'll see a little dip as the unit sweeps. So therefore, you don't need to buy a measurements 59, you can use one of these. And the tiny spectrum analyzer has a wonderful built-in signal generator that's fully synthesized. You can set it down to like 10 or 20 kilohertz all the way up to halfway to light. It's adjustable at foot, fantastic resolution. You can modulate it with a choice of audio frequencies. And it's an amazing device, and of course it's all based on cell phone chips and such that were developed for, of course, other purposes. So we can thank China for that, and it's well worth the $100 or maybe 110 for the two of these devices. Can take the place of an awful lot of other testing.
Yeah. If you wanted to, if you get where you want to delve into some of this stuff, it's kind of cool. Well, anyway, questions and comments.
Some brand names for
Yes.
vector analyzers?
I'm sorry.
Brand names, what products?
Which analyzer were you using?
Well, there's a whole bunch of them. They're all seemingly come out of the same factory, except there are slight variants. It's been said that if you look in the side of the vector network analyzer, if you see some metal shields, that's the one to buy. They can cheapen them by a couple bucks by leaving out some of the shielding, but that's not the best ones to get, they say.
Yeah, the new ones also have a metal case.
Yeah, and of course there are more expensive versions with screens that we can see when we get older.
Yeah.
This is also to be recommended.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a screen this big, and I have a VN.
I showed it to you guys on Zoom, a little oscilloscope is that square. It's good for 200 kilohertz. I use it to check power supplies.
Yeah,
For the UPS, if you want to put lithium iron phosphate batteries in an APC or any UPS, you have to check for the anti-sulfating spike. And I used it for that, and it fit right in my pocket, so, it's great.
yeah, some of this stuff is nuts. I mean, you can carry a whole laboratory, in a box like that. Another question? Yes?
I just thought I'd say, I bought both of these, and both of them from a company called RSync, and they have really good technical support. I thought I was very pleased with them. I bought the Nano BNA for $129.
Yeah. Yes.
Is it typical for devices like that to be able to save a JPEG image you can send to your computer?
Yes, you can plug them back into a USB port on a computer. Software device. Absolutely.
As I recall, in Nano DNA, you can run from the computer and get the display up on your
Out of the
screen.
box, they won't work with the Mac. Out of the box, they won't work with the Mac. But I understand the VNA, there's somebody developed it for the Mac. You have to download the software.
Okay.
They're always changing the software on that too,
Yeah,
The
okay.
thing is, I bought a little oscilloscope that's about like that,
Yeah.
this, and it's good for 100 megahertz, but they did a review on YouTube, and you found it was past 400 megahertz. And it has a video output that you can put to a monitor.
Oh, well, that's cool. I've been kind of looking for one of
All
those.
about being like $62. Absolutely amazing. It takes a while to learn how to code it.
Yeah, Dave.
Can we go back to the isolation transformer for a minute?
Yeah.
All right, well, there seems to be eternal arguments online. People talk about isolation transformers that don't really isolate. There's apparently two kinds of isolation transformers you can buy. One passes the earth ground through, and one does not.
Well, that's not isolation
Well,
transformer.
apparently it is. Every time I start to think I understand this stuff, I go back and I go, nah, I guess I don't.
Get your ohm meter out. The output connector of that thing should not have connectivity to any of the pins on the input.
Well, there's a lot.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah,
That's all.
It would seem that simple, and yet people who apparently are smart, or maybe smarter than me, surround yourself with, and it goes on and on and on. And
Well, be careful. There's a bunch of people out there that are really questionable. Yeah, John.
Down that line, some people think that isolation transformers are actually EMI suppression
I believe
devices.
that's part of the confusion.
And in other words, an EMI suppression device would filter crap off the AC line, but it has a 3-terminal input, okay, with a ground connector and a grounded output.
Right.
Yeah.
There's apparently situations where you must have that, where it's required.
Yeah, there's hospital things and whatnot where you run into that.
But guys like us will buy them and not know the difference.
Well, I buy it and stick putty in the ground thing and,
JB Weld.
Yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
did on mine. I shoved JB
Matt.
Weld in the ground pit. Done.
So, the idea of buying the lab stuff because it's better and it's cheap now versus buying this actual cheap modern crap is, how accurate is this stuff and do we care? Like the $20 multimeter.
That's sort of the disgusting part. That $20 meter, the voltage reference in that works on quantum physical principles. And you take any two of those meters and they will agree to a high degree any voltage they're reading. So the old stuff might not even have done that.
There's always the argument like, oh, I'm going to go buy me a fluke meter, but they're really expensive, so I'll buy one that's 40 years old. Is it worth it versus buying?
Well, especially flukes. I have an old expensive fluke that has nothing but trouble with its LCD display.
Right.
And buy a cheap Chinese one and be happy. Yeah.
I got 2 comments to make. I bought one of those component testers that with the Arduino type circuitry.
Yeah.
And that one actually, you can test the remote controls with it. You actually read out.
Oh yeah, some of them have an IR photo cell on them, you point the remote at it, and it does ones
What
and,
the code is.
yeah,
And the other thing I wanted to mention regarding isolation transformers, I've taken transformers that have a 110 and 220 windings in it, and I would just feed one of the windings, and the other winding would be isolated
yeah,
for
yeah.
small, power applications.
Or for that matter, if you have like a couple of hefty filament transformers, connect the 12 volts together and just run 117 in one side, 117 out the other side, you have an isolation transformer. It's kind of what you have laying around. It's kind of, yes, Scott?
Now, I want to make sure I heard this correctly. With an isolation transformer unit, the earth ground, the going to the output of the isolation transformer, bad?
Bad, no, no, you don't want that at all. Now see, on the input, the three-prong input, you have the ground prong, which goes back to your service panel. They go back to the panel, and somewhere they go to earth. Now you don't want any earth connection on the side where you're working on the radio. So neutral and hot come into the primary of the transformer. Two wires come out of the secondary and go to a two-prong plug, and there's no connection there to ground whatsoever.
Most of the radios have just two-prong.
Yeah. Then, like I said, some of the confusion was coming. There's these RFI suppression transformers that are actually isolation transformers, but they carry the safety ground through to the output, and then people get confused.
Yeah, you can get
That's
a
bad.
12-inch
For what we're doing, that's bad.
Amazon male to female plug thing, and on the male end, just clip the ground.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to beat that, but you just have to be aware of it.
Yeah, so on my isolation box,
Yeah.
it has three-prong sockets on it. Should I just leave the ground part open?
I would think well, you're not going to have anything that you're going to plug in there that's going to make a difference, because all of your AC/DC radios are just two-prong plugs, so it maybe doesn't really
so
matter.
now you're saying it doesn't matter?
It maybe doesn't matter, but
But if you're working on a device with a 3-connector plug, you could blow up your oscilloscope if it is grounded. I think I'd lose those ground connections. It's one of those adapters.
Yeah.
for ground.
Question. I understand you need a 0.05 capacitor in the signal generator. Is it the signal generator?
It's only for safety.
To your AC, the radio, your
Yeah.
A5. Do you also need a 0.05 or 0.01 in the ground side?
Not really. Well,
Because I've noticed you sometimes get like an AC-induced current through there.
well, you could, especially if you don't have an isolation transformer.
Maybe that's what I was doing.
I normally assume that the ground from my test instrument is going to ground the thing I'm working on positively. And like I said, that's where you get where you'd have the trouble with a hot chassis and an AC/DC set, and then you got a short from the hot in the radio to the ground of the test instrument. Now you have a problem.
Do you care to discuss variacs and isolation transformers, which goes before which?
I put the variac before the isolation transformer. Dave?
And I've also been monitoring a discussion or an argument. People are saying, well, you don't need an isolation transformer, just use a GFCI. I guess, I suppose that would work, but it just seems.
Well, it could, but yeah, I mean, here's the problem with the All-American 5s. Let me see if I can get back to this. Where was it? This circuit down here, and when the switch is closed and the set is on, you want the neutral wire to come in here, go to common ground in the radio, because this stuff going to the switch is out here by the volume control. You don't want extra hum getting to the volume control. So that's why they seemingly switch the ground here. Now, if you're working on the radio, you turn it on when it's not plugged in, you mark one side of the plug black, and you put that in the ground side of the outlet. Now you can safely work on it, okay? However, when you open the switch, the ground becomes hot back through the filament string. And so people go through all kinds of contortions to correct this wiring. Don't do it, leave it the way it is. It made you happy for all those years. It's just the way they are. And so sometimes I'll do that. I'll note which is ground on a radio. I'll plug it in, keep it turned on, and very carefully work on it. And but isolation transformer is the right answer.
Al?
Yeah.
When you use an isolation transformer and you hook your test equipment, it's a ground plug, and you put the ground lead of the test equipment to the isolation side, aren't you introducing a ground? And that
Well, you're putting a ground on there, but no current can flow through it because you don't have, because you're isolated from the input of the from the input of the radio, from the input of the thing. Yeah.
Here, another question. On this schematic here, you have an input capacitor of 50 microfarads on a 35Z5. When I looked that up, on the 35Z5, they said the maximum capacitance should be 40 microfarads.
Oh, you mean here?
Yeah, right. So what do you do in a situation like that? You make it a 30, and then after the resistor, you put a 50, or
Well,
how much difference does it make?
That doesn't make a lot, but see, what this, you want to be, you don't want to make this 200, okay? Because what this capacitor is doing, of course, you have rectified AC coming out of here. The ripple current goes through that capacitor to ground and represents current that's being drawn through the tube. So if you go crazy on that input capacitor, you draw extra current through the tube, and in fact, in a transformer set, now you're going to draw extra current out of the transformer. So you don't want to go crazy on that input capacitor. If you have more hum than you think you ought to have, make the one on this side big, because this is just feeding the plate of the output transformer. Hum doesn't really matter there, but if you're going to overcap it, do it on
40
the.
to 50 does make it that.
Yeah, that won't. 10%. No, nobody cares about 10%.
Don't forget, in old sets like that, the caps had plus 100%, minus 50%.
Yeah, they were all over the place. Plus 80,
wow.
minus 20 was the usual.
No, they went as much as plus 100%.
Well, whatever, but they were all over the
Yes.
place.
But you're talking.
I wouldn't go too crazy about 40 or 50. Like I say, you just don't want to go in there and put 200 or 300 in because you think it's going to make it quiet. Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks. So it's always amazing, guys, how a refresher course and all these questions come up, and we think we know, but we don't really know. And then there's so much incredible new equipment that comes out that Al fortunately told us about, so we're going to really appreciate that. My only comment about some of the cheap meters, they do work, they'll work. You drop them once, they'll work. Drop them twice, that's the problem. But then you can say, well, I'll just get another $20 meter. Well, okay.
Go to Harbor Freight.
All right. Harbor Freight, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I ask a question to Al?
Yeah.
The ground beam, the pilot light, I understand it's connected to the tap on the 35Z5 for that pilot light. What I don't understand is the electrical reason to tie it into the plate. Why do you tie it into the plate of the 35Z5?
Well,
There's a reason, and I don't know what it is.
it's just how they designed it. Okay, you're going to draw 150 mils through the heater string, plus some more current here to provide your B+. And for some reason, well, of course you need it some way to run a 6-volt pilot bulb. If you try putting a pilot light in series out here, you find out it's a complete disaster because of the warm-up times on the tubes and the bulb. So what they did was put the bulb in here across this guy, and they, for whatever reason, I don't understand it, but almost universally, they decided to pull the B plus current off that point right there. So it's going through the bulb as well as the filament. And when you turn the radio on, the bulb comes up, the bulb dims down as this filament heats up, and then later on maybe the bulb will flash when you have high audio peaks on the output of it. And that's just the way they did it. And there's probably a good reason for it, because they were being really careful about these. Dev?
Yeah, well, that first section of the filament was supposedly a fuse. If you
That could be
shorten
too.
the B plus, it would take out that first section of filament.
Okay, and here's another thing too. If you leave a dead pilot bulb in there, you beat up that section of the filament, and then you eventually lose your rectifier.
That's
Yes.
exactly my point. The original specification called for a resistor to be added there in parallel with the light bulb. In case the light bulb failed, then you would be able to shunt some.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was in the original specs, but that's one of the hacks that.
It's in the
radio repair
RCA
guys-
receiving tube manual.
Pardon me?
It's in the RCA receiving tube.
Oh, okay, good. I'll take a look at that. My recollection is it's 220 ohms, and you probably need 2 watts.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and so if you're paranoid about that, you can add one to your radio and never blow the pilot light.
They stopped doing that because they figured out they just didn't care.
They didn't care. Yeah, it's got put into the shop, then it would make more money.
I read that in an article, actually, a technical repairman's journal, and the guy was noting the increased sales of those tubes because Mrs. Smith was running her thing with the pilot light burnt out.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
They
exactly
were digging it. They were running it for me. They were like, yeah, this is great. You know, we hope all the bulbs burn out.
Okay, well, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, we will be having an auction, those 3 wonderful radios out front. And we don't have our official auctioneer. He's busy with setting up for tomorrow, so I will be your auctioneer. Okay, so if you'd like to join the auction, come on out and we'll get it started.